Getting Down to Studying, Practical Tips on Increasing Your Motivation. Have you ever experienced an irresistible urge to take a break, tidy your room, make a phone call, or have yet another cup of coffee when you're faced with the task of working on an academic assignment? If so, then you have allowed displacement activities, or self-generated distractions, to give you an excuse for not getting down to studying. But take heart, you're not alone in experiencing this problem. Every student faces a daily battle to energize themselves to tackle their books. After all, very few people wake up thinking, I really feel like studying today. But just because you're rarely in the mood to study doesn't mean that you cannot learn efficiently once you sit down at your desk. As I'll explain shortly, the secret is to develop a study routine. As the famous psychologist William James observed over a century ago, it's easier to act your way into a feeling than to feel your way into an action. In other words, our behaviour often determines our mood, not the other way round. And so, the purpose of this section is to give you some practical tips on increasing your motivation and getting down to studying. These tips may be broken down into 3 key strategies. First, give yourself rewards for actual work done, not for simply thinking about studying in the future or for taking a break before you start. Second, use goal-setting techniques to study smarter, not harder. Finally, develop a consistent learning routine by studying at the same time in the same place every day. Before I explain these 3 strategies, however, let's consider briefly what the word motivation means. Motivation refers to any factor that drives or energizes our behavior. For example, we might want to study a topic because we find it fascinating in its own right, what's called intrinsic motivation, or alternatively, because it has to be covered for an imminent exam, a form of external motivation. Either way, effective motivation requires 2 things: energy and direction. Imagine a car driving around in circles in a car park. It has plenty of energy or fuel in the tank, but it's going nowhere. Sometimes students behave like that car simply because they have no sense of direction in their learning. Before we consider some ways of overcoming this problem and getting down to studying, I want you to reflect on what motivated you to attend university. When you return, I'll give you 3 techniques for increasing your motivation. Switch this recording off now, and when you're ready, switch it back on again. Increasing your motivation. As I explained earlier, there are at least 3 practical ways of increasing your motivation to study. First, you can reward yourself for successful study behaviour. Psychologists have discovered that activities which are followed by rewards gradually tend to become rewarding in themselves. In other words, if you learn to associate studying with pleasurable consequences, then over time, studying will become an enjoyable activity in itself. For example, you could give yourself a reward such as having a cup of coffee or watching a favourite TV programme after you've completed a study task, such as to summarise a chapter in a textbook. Of course, you must remember that rewards should only be given after you've achieved your study goals, not for simply thinking about study or for avoiding study. For example, I'll take a break now, but I'll study later. The second motivational technique for studying involves goal setting. Increasing your motivation through goal setting. Study smarter, S-M-A-R-T-E-R, not harder. As I said, effective motivation requires direction as well as drive, and the best way to give your studies a sense of direction is to use a technique called goal setting. A goal is a target or objective that we strive to attain, for example, passing an exam or submitting an assignment on time. So, goal setting is the process by which we set targets for ourselves.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?